Hey, aloha, love tribe. Welcome to the podcast. I have somebody here with me who is an author, an aerospace engineer. He was a former running on a Senate platform of zero tax for Bitcoin. And I really am so excited to welcome Bryan Solstin. Hi, thanks for coming here on the show.
Very pleased to be here, Valerie. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's talk about, let's let the audience know who you are. We're going to talk about both of, all of your work and the books that you've got going on. And obviously, my audience is very passionate about changing the world. They're activists, they're coaches, they're creators, they're change makers, they're environmentalists, they're investors, and impact investors and impact entrepreneurs. Let's talk about who you are and how the heck did you get here to Bitcoin and why is conservation efforts hard to work in a fiat system?
Yeah, what's my
Mhm.
rabbit hole, so to speak?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote Zenimal about that to try to capture, my experience, and really, I was looking at it from a minimalistic perspective. I mean, one of the hooks that really grabbed me was cryptography. I was a long, privacy advocate, long time interested in that topic. Follower of Phil Zimmerman, he
Mhm.
hired Hal Finney. I mean, these guys were doing great cryptography work, building fundamental foundation for Bitcoin. And so I didn't really discover Bitcoin until 2017. I mean, truth is, I was just too busy. When you're working in aerospace, you can get lost in your work.
Mhm.
And so it was one of those times when I came up for air that I discovered Bitcoin in 2017, and it spoke to me in terms of cryptography. It's like, wow, privacy proven on money, a network. There's no way there's going to be a backdoor on this one. If it's money, I mean, it's this one's for real. And so that brought me into it. And then conservation and minimalism, let's call it Zen. Bitcoin spoke to me on those levels.
And so let's talk about that a little bit because I told you before we hit play, I was listening to you talking about Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance and meditation, and how does that fit into your worldview and your daily practice as a human and as an engineer, obviously as a Bitcoiner and as a writer.
Well, I'm a minimalist, and what I mean by that is, anything I don't use for 2 years, I get rid of it.
Oh,
I
cool.
mean, if people walk through my house, it's not cluttered, it's pretty open. I idealize the time of my life when I could put all of my possessions into my Volkswagen Passat and drive anywhere. Those days are gone, but I still think about that. Life has gotten a little more complicated. But yeah, Zen. I was influenced by Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance at a young age, and this concept of quality, which was a little bit hard for
Mhm.
me to grasp, but this pursuit of quality.
Mm.
And and how does that relate to Bitcoin early on? Well, Bitcoin, if you compare fiat, which is the root of all evil, and Bitcoin, which is the root of all good, because it creates efficiency, as opposed to this, let's call it artificial, you know, growth, and let's call it a misallocated growth, or what did Hayek call it? His great phrase is passing my passing my mind. It'll come to me, but more or less, this artificial growth, this misallocated growth, is you cannot have conservation in a fiat system because fiat is dependent on growth. And so whatever you do in terms of conservation, it's ultimately futile because this fiat artificial growth, this second rate everything, is going to just overwhelm it in the long run. So yeah, Zen and minimalism conservation, they have a lot of alignment.
Can you unpack that a little bit more? Like when you're saying artificial growth and why conservation can't live and at the same time, like long-term conservation, obviously, which is what we're seeking, to conserve all of our natural resources for, hopefully tens of thousands of years to come. And so why is that futile or, not really going to be able to be accomplished in a fiat system? It just like for my little fourth grade brain.
Yeah, well, let's go back to 1971 when
Yeah.
we got off a commodity-based monetary system, gold. In 1971, we went full on fiat,
Hmm.
and so did all the other currencies around the world at that time. And so since then, every time we juice the economy by expanding the monetary system, debasing it,
Hmm.
it's like taking a drug. It feels good. But the
Hmm.
problem is that we have to keep on taking that drug. Every time we get into a recession, we have to take more.
Yeah.
And you compare, the bailouts as over each major recession, it's much bigger. Remember the TARP back in 2008, 2009,
Yeah.
700 billion. This time when we go into a recession, it's going to be in the trillions.
Yeah.
And after that, what's going to happen after that? Well, it's going to be unimaginable how centralized the economy is going to become. And they're going to be desperate for any kind of growth. And these central planners and who are said that they can stabilize everything, and they're centralizing capital through the expansion of our monetary system. What are they going to do? They're going to print more, and that takes care of this. The central banks and their shareholders are going to be the beneficiaries of that. And again, it's going to centralize capital.
And so what do you think about I've there's going to be three questions out of this little nugget here. Um I've been hearing different things in the environmental movement about, oh, we're going to, tokenize nature, and we're going to turn nature into this. Okay, we can all, put nature on the blockchain. And so I hear a lot of this, and it makes my
Um,
skin crawl, because I think people don't understand this concept. And so can you help unpack a little bit why that is not really the best idea in the world?
yeah, I'm actually gonna defer to John Nash on this one.
Okay.
Uh, John Nash, he was in that biography documentary that won Best Picture, A Beautiful Mind,
Hmm.
and he won a Nobel Prize in economics, and he was the discoverer, and he was of the Nash Equilibrium, which he wrote back in the 1950s.
Hmm.
And so, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
Just about tokenizing nature,
Yeah,
because there's a lot of people that think, oh, we're going to conserve nature if we tokenize it. And then to me, I see this turning into the biggest nightmare, and, putting it on the blockchain and all this stuff.
yeah. So his equilibrium concept, it's an economic concept. It's very important. A relationship to that equilibrium is a standard measurement of value. The quality of money will that standard measurement of quality, is standard measurement of value, will it emerge? And when it does, it's a good thing. You have stability, and that really is the narrative of what Bitcoin has the potential of becoming. It really becomes the potential of a Bitcoin equilibrium. That ability to enable quality money, to be able to enable a standard measurement of value is the main narrative, and we're fast moving towards that. Now, tokenizing things, you know, John Nash, if you look back in his history, he would dismiss that as saying, well, you can write contracts verbally. That's what the judicial court system is for. Really, that's a secondary issue. And so tokenizing is really a deviation from the principal narrative of what Bitcoin brings to humanity and this world. The idea we can go back to this 1971 where we had a commodity-based monetary system that allowed honest trade and stability. And you see all the problems that come out of instability. Uh, that is a much bigger issue than any of this tokenization. I mean, what is the value add of a token? It's already being handled with titles. It's already being handled with contracts. What's the delta? What's the advantage of putting it on a very expensive blockchain? I'd like to hear that from anybody.
Yeah, me too. And again, I think, is it fancy marketing? Is it misguided regulators trying to put this together? It seems like it could be kind of a combination
Well,
of both of those things. Um, I mean, and I think about, we think about fishing, right? And it's like, okay, cool, you can get your fishing license and you can go fish anywhere, in this region, if you're a commercial fisherman. But is there benefit to saying, cool, you're stewarding this area, you're stewarding this area, you're stewarding this area, and then people are actually caring about those areas a little bit more? Is there something that can be beneficial from that lens, for stewarding certain parts of the rainforest, or stewarding, um, versus just like, cool, we're going to go in and rape and pillage and just extract value out of any of these natural resource areas?
Well, the tokenization is marketing nonsense.
Yeah.
Blockchain I think blockchain is really, it was an immune response by the Communist Chinese Party saying, okay, this Bitcoin is decentralizing. That's a threat to us. We have to somehow get rid of it. And so they came up with this other narrative. It's blockchain, not Bitcoin. Well, no, it's Bitcoin. Blockchain is not, tokenization is not the innovation here. If you look at the white paper, Satoshi very clearly identifies what the innovation was there. It was a digital transaction without a third party, which, oh, by the way, that's disintermediating. You know, that's decentralizing. That was the innovation. Oh, there's a second innovation in there that he's written about, and that was decentralizing governance. Ooh, that hurts. CCP.
Yeah.
Communist Chinese Party. They don't like that. So what do they have to do? Throw out this immune system and say we got to bring up this other narrative, tokenization, blockchain, whatever. It's not decentralizing. Well, it is all about decentralizing the transaction of value from one person to another. You don't need a third person.
Yeah.
You need just two. A third is a crowd, right?
There is a
Those are
crowd.
John Nash words, by the way.
Okay, cool. Let's. I want to dive into that a little bit more, but I want to come back to obviously John Nash in just a couple minutes. But two things have recently happened. Larry Fink from BlackRock just went on, and he's finally, after 5 years of, poo-pooing Bitcoin, he's like, oh, this is a great alternative asset. And so I'm concerned about people like him or Donald Trump, which I'm grateful that he went and bought a hamburger yesterday up at PubKey. Yay. It's super duper cool that they're showing how Bitcoin can be a medium of exchange. But do you feel like now that these guys who are, and obviously who knows if Trump is just, pandering so that he can get votes, because I know he's doing some crypto bullshit too. So with Larry Fink, obviously he's managing, a little bit of capital here, right? And so when he starts, giving his stamp of approval, is this going to turn more? Do you feel like more capital is just going to turn into store of value Bitcoin, and then it's only going to be for, the really, really rich people, and then eventually we're not going to be able to have this medium of exchange that we really need in certain countries and places where, they are under horrible oppressive regimes, and they're having hyperinflation go on. What do you think about what's going on with those two things, with the
I've heard that
centralization?
narrative before, where Bitcoin is for rich people. And I remember I
Yeah.
was actually at a RFK rally here in Seattle, and to my surprise, a lot of them were not Bitcoiners. And I was talking to Bitcoin, and one of the guys says, "Yeah, Bitcoin is for rich people." I'm like, "Wow," And I didn't get into deep discussion on this, but fundamentally, fiat is about extracting wealth from poor people. Because you can,
Mm-hmm.
anytime you're doing inflation, anybody who's holding that dollar, it's being debased, it's evaporating away, and who does that hurt the most? Well, the poor people. Wealthy people, they use that to evaporate their debt on holding real capital. So it's to their advantage. So Bitcoin is really about making it, let's say, a level playing field and not taking advantage of these emerging economies.
But what do you think about? Okay, so a couple things. So to me, I have a, I'm always trying to poke holes and make sure that I'm protecting myself and my children in the future and whatnot. And I think of, if we start getting this, big consolidation of capital from these big players, and if they start influencing policy, as far as like, oh, you can't transact, or like we're seeing what's going on with the Samurai case right now with the all the KYC and AML stuff. And so I feel very like the more that these little guys who are developers and coders start getting pushed to the side, and these big guys who've got all this influence and money and the ability to start saying, nope, you can't have this on your phone. Obviously, X just got banned in Brazil. And so all this kind of nonsense of our privacy and our, our ability to transact freely with each other across borders using Bitcoin, I have a really big concern for, the future if, we get rah, rah, rah that Larry Fink and Trump or whoever is excited about Bitcoin, but is that going to lead to some other effects down the road that are detrimental to those of us who again, want to have that private ability to transact?
I'm really not worried about Larry Fink and
Okay,
these
good.
others that are
Mhm.
consolidating Bitcoin. What I'm more concerned about is we're already financialized. I mean, the United States more or less is like the Soviet Union. I mean, this is a centralized power now, thanks to
Yeah.
financialization. All the too bigs to fail, now they call them significantly important banks. They've changed the
Mhm.
name. They keep on their wealth. The wealth gap is accelerating. That's the bigger problem. It's the fiat game that is accelerating the centralization of wealth, power,
Okay.
capital. And
Got it.
and let me just talk about personal experience. I mean, right
Yeah.
now, I work at Boeing, and as you know, things are not good there right now. We're having the machinists are striking. Machinists are more or less the people that are working in the factory. I'm part of a different union. I'm an engineer, and so I'm part of the aerospace engineer, SPIA, whatever it stands for. I'm really not a big union guy. I don't think it fixes problems. The bigger problem, and right now, the the negotiations are pretty tough right now because the machinists want a 40% increase in their wages and some other things.
Wow.
And yeah, most of us would go, what, 40%
I
increase?
know
That's huge.
40%, but that's actually a realistic number based on all the inflation that we've had with all this money printing, probably even more. But it's
Yeah.
it's difficult to go up and ask for a 40% raise. So yeah, keep going.
So, the people that are working in the machinists, they're pointing fingers at management, and management is pointing fingers at them,
Mhm.
and we're not getting this resolved. And so, yeah, we aren't building planes. They shut down the Seattle production of airplanes,
Wow.
and that's bad. So the point is that as a Bitcoiner, I look at this differently. And also, by the way, John Nash would also look at this differently. He looks at it from the quality of money to be able to make long-term contracts. Well, when you have a debt-based system, an inflationary system, and prices are going up for people because they're debasing the money, that's making life more expensive for all the machinists. And they're blaming Boeing. Well, it's not Boeing that
Yeah.
created this instability in the long-term contract. It's our debt-based fiat system that's causing the problem. So this is John Nash would say, you can measure the quality of money by looking at the ability to create long-term contracts. And we can't do that anymore in this inflationary system.
Oh, wow.
Let me give you some other
Yeah, yeah.
examples. You know
Okay,
what?
cool.
What in 2023, Silvergate went down. That's because this is like a washing machine. The Fed raises rates, they drop rates, and this is good for the wealthy that are. It's like a washing machine, but for let's say Silvergate, that wasn't a good thing. If you take a look at like this, what was it? This LNG, this liquid nitrate, actually liquid natural gas terminal, $10 billion that they were building went bankrupt because of inflation. So, they get these long-term contracts with these ultra artificially low interest rates, and then it gets unstable, and they do the only thing they can do, pull the debasement lever and start printing money effectively. And it creates instability for these long-term contracts. So the point is that if we're looking at the Boeing situation, I really don't like the idea of pointing fingers at management or pointing fingers at the machinists. It's really it's our fiat-based system that has raised the cost of living for all these machinists that has created this very bad situation for Boeing. And what does that mean for the rest of us? Well, it's we're exporting U.S. Treasuries. We're not exporting airplanes. And who's getting wealthy from that? Again, it's the SIBs. What does the SIB stand for? significantly important.
important banks. Yeah. Um,
Yep.
yeah, I know. And that's insane. So yesterday I was so excited to see that, uh, two of my favorite people were doing a podcast, Rick Rubin and Jack Mallers,
Oh
and
yeah.
which is great because I mean,
Hmm.
okay, cool. Rick's obviously getting an extra good schooling on Bitcoin, and you can tell he's curious. And anybody who knows Rick is going to listen to what Rick says. He's guru, right? And so that's a really cool. I call it orange dominoes when these big guys who've got big followers and a lot of influence, when they can start talking about, why Bitcoin is a tool for peace, why Bitcoin is a tool for conservation, why Bitcoin is a tool for fairness and equality in the world. And so, of course, we were talking about violence and how we can only keep the wars, these forever wars going. Alex Gladstein talks about that a lot because of this money printer, and obviously Boeing, I would imagine, has a government contract or two. Uh, so, so it's just like this, oh my gosh, how do we get out of the giant mess? I know you quote Jeff Booth quite a bit, who I adore.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and we think of Buckminster Fuller and, building the alternative economy and the alternative system and letting the old ones starve and die. How can we, let's talk about, you and John Nash and this book, and how can we build this new system? Like, how can we really truly get ourselves out of it? And how long do you think it could take if we took action?
Ooh, how long is it going to take? I don't think I can answer that. I know that we're ratcheting up every time they start printing money. So I have no doubt what direction and what's going to happen in the long run. How
Hmm.
fast that's going to happen, I'm not really worried about that. I'm pretty comfortable with how things are progressing. You look over the past 15 years, and the growth of Bitcoin has been spectacular.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm happy. What about all these control systems? They have to control things so that they have, they're, they're dependent on expanding the monetary system to maintain stability, right? They
Hmm.
have to expand to maintain stability. That's not stable when you have to expand it. So they need control. They need more and more control to make that. They need more KYC, which is know your
Hmm.
customer, or AML, anti.
Money laundering.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they need more and more information. They need more and more surveillance. Well, I'm a privacy advocate. No, no, you
Hmm.
don't. I don't need the third party. Okay. I don't need everyone to know about how I spend my money, but they want to know why. Whatever happened to these constitutional rights that we have here in the United States about you know right to property and implied privacy and the Bill of Rights and so on.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because what we see going on right now, I think Governor Newsom just is trying to pass something where memes are illegal, um, which is
Yeah,
obviously free speech. And I'm like, what are you talking about? But you can go shoplift for almost $1,000 and no penalties. But now we want to make memes illegal. And to me, that is such a, I used to identify as a Democrat for a long time, and I goodbye, no, thank you. Like, I'm
yeah.
completely
I just
abandoned
retweeted
it.
that
I'm all
myself.
independent now, and I've really I mean, I've never been like, oh, I'm a hardcore Democrat, but I've always been more like, I want freedom of choice. I want people to care about each other. I want everybody to have an equal opportunity. And then when I really started learning more about money and Bitcoin and policy, I was just like, okay, again, politics, you obviously, God bless you for running for Senate and trying to get in there into the swamp and make some change. But it's about policy, and it's these people are all these egos and everything going on. And I'm like, what happened to the people who had common sense policies that would keep our constitution in place? Like, why are we seeing such a disintegration of the civil liberties and whatnot in this world, especially with, I see the Democrats being ridiculous. I don't even understand what's
Yeah,
going on.
yeah. I used to be a Democrat myself, but recently the way the DNC has treated RFK, it's like, okay, no more.
No.
Uh, they were even bringing lawsuits against him so that he wouldn't be on the ballot.
Yep.
I thought, wow, okay, this is not this is I'm a Democrat because, or I used to be. I'm no longer. I'm an independent now.
Yep. Me too.
But fundamentally I'm socially liberal and I'm fiscally conservative.
Hmm.
And so you know, yeah, I'm done with that kind of anti-dem. And what I mean by social liberal, or classical liberalism, I'm really talking about separation of money and state, separation of media and state, media and state, separation of the judiciary. I mean, these are our constitutional ideals,
Yeah.
and this is classical liberalism. I mean, these are ideals that after World War II were spread around the world with the intent of we will never do that again. Well, we are going to do that again because we're giving up on these fundamental rights. And the Democrats, the DNC, I shouldn't say Democrats, I should say the DNC has
Mhm.
given up on these values.
Yeah.
They want more and more control. They want more surveillance. And, this is like any other centralized organization or people that are focused on growing their hierarchy to at the loss of people's property rights.
And it's just because to me, it's insidious in all categories because we think about healthcare and bodily rights, right? We want to have sovereign minds. We want to have sovereign our bodies, our choices, don't make me get a shot. Or, if I need to, God forbid, terminate a pregnancy, hopefully early enough that it's, you catch it, you should have that
Yeah.
choice, in my opinion. And so I feel like it's hypocritical in some of these areas where it's like they want to have this, uh, freedom, but then they want to start smushing it down in these other areas and pulling it back. And so I'm just, I don't know what is going on. And I've been, since I became a Bitcoiner, I've gotten a lot more. I mean, I've always been very interested in, alternative ways of thinking and alternative concepts and, you know, uh, are there aliens? Did the CIA kill JFK? All that stuff. Like it all seems more logical to me now than anything. And it's just like, do you know who Whitney Webb is?
No,
Oh, dude. Oh my gosh. Unlimited
I want
Hangout.
to know.
Whitney Webb wrote One Nation Under Blackmail. I mean, she wrote two books. They're literally like they're this thick. They're insane. Um, but her investigative journalism is so powerful in how she's uncovering, historically all of these blackmail ties from the CIA, from the Mossad, from Epstein's Island and everything. And I'm just after reading some of it, I mean, she's just an encyclopedic uh, journalist and writer. And, my little brain, I'm like, shit, I can only listen to this for a little bit because I gotta assemble the dots, right? But it makes me question just the system at large. Like, how does every single player in the system have some type of a blackmail link that whoever these powers that be are able to push a button at any time and go, yeah, your wife is deleted now, or anything that they can control you if you're in these positions of political uh, power. And so that's a big concern for me. And I would just be curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I don't know about that topic. I'm not read on that, but I do know that the ultimate control is debasing money. When you are the beneficiary, uh,
Hmm.
when you can print money, that is the superordinate power,
Yeah.
and everything else is secondary at that point.
But control of information, though, we think about what's going on with Nostr. We think about what's going on with censorship of, X down in Brazil right now. And so, the first thing I think people, we understand, take away people's ability to communicate. Obviously money is a form of communication, right? I'm going to give this value to you and we're communicating and we should be able to do so without, prying eyes all the time. Um, it just feels like there's little prongs of these I don't know, the governments, institutions, these powers that be that are just slowly, pulling these things away. And we're like, oh, well, I guess it doesn't really affect me that much. It's over there. It's over there in that country. It's down here. And it's just like we're getting normalized and this is getting accustomed into our brain that, well, it's for our own good, right? That's the
Hmm.
common line that they like to spew to us. And so how do, without being crazy sounding, like my family thinks I'm insane with all the stuff that I research and talk about. And like I said, I'm I'm not an aerospace engineer or a hedge fund manager, but it's like I feel like, how do we help the folks who are listening, and the normal people who aren't in the Bitcoin world, start to understand these things from a lens of love and compassion and freedom?
Yeah, I used to try to orange pill people, and I, with close friends, close family, and I was really excited about it because I studied it a lot, like two
Mhm.
hours a day for years,
Yeah.
and then I share it with other people, and they just, I could see their eyes were kind of glazing over, and y- you know, and like even my most recent book, when I was doing a second draft, I was reading it to my mother, right? And she was falling asleep at times. But when I talked about, John Nash and, this, when he was arrested for this bisexual experience down in Santa Monica, oh, bisexual? She was like all over that. And so I realized people are into different things,
Yeah.
but they really aren't into monetary policies.
No.
And I remember when I was young and I'd hang out with these gold bugs, when I was 16, and I just thought, gosh, they're kind of different, or that's not my thing. I was into, at 16 years old, I just wasn't into the gold bug narrative. That wasn't. I was into cryptography and narrative and privacy. That was interesting to me. But really understanding the monetary system. How so your question was, how do I help other people really understand that?
Hmm.
I honestly, I've had a hard time. So I write. I've written 3 books now, and I think the fact that I'm writing a biography and talking about these concepts, I think that's far more approachable than what I've done in the past, which kind of tends to be a little bit more encyclopedic.
Let's talk about Bitcoin and the Nash Equilibrium, and like, you know, let's kind of dissect this so that people can understand. Because to me, the minute it says Nash Equilibrium, my mind is like, oh, that's going to be too smart for me. I'm gonna not, that scares me. So let's talk about why that's not a scary thing to look at for everybody.
Because really he had an amazing life of genius when he was 21 years old, and then 25 years, I think it was 29, he was around 29 when he got schizophrenia, paranoia,
Mm,
mentally, I mean, illness that was debilitating for about 25 years of his life.
wow.
And then he recovered and continued his work. And it was really about trying to make the Nash equilibrium immortal. And he started programming. And so these things align with the creation of Bitcoin.
Okay,
And
so yeah, let's talk about this. So I'm just showing folks a table of contents. So do you want to go into any of this, like a little bit for people, so that you can dive in a little and just understand his world and whatnot?
yeah, the first part is really a chronological history of John Nash, and I know a lot of people know about John Nash through the movie A Beautiful Mind, which won Best Picture. But
Hmm.
that was looking at John's, let's say his genius and his illness and his recovery from let's more or less from a medical perspective, whereas
Hmm.
I'm more interested in his accomplishments, and so I went through his chronology that you can see at the beginning there,
Hmm.
that really talk about his accomplishments, and in mathematics, in cryptography, in parallel computing, which by the way is a distributed network, which is you know decentralized computing. He was doing that back in 1955. 1954 for the parallel computing, 1955 for cryptography. He was hanging out with some of the best cryptographers in the world there at Prince University. That was a hotbed for World War II development, and he showed up after that scene and was rubbing shoulders with the best. And he was very much into factoring prime numbers, which are actually parameterized within the elliptical method for Bitcoin. So there's just a lot of history that crept into Bitcoin. So I cover that history, but then after I go through, a big milestone for him was his 2002 publication, Ideal Money. But he immediately started lecturing all over the world on something called asymptotically ideal money. So ideal money was kind of a revolutionary way of doing things. You have a centralized way of managing some index. And then asymptotically ideal money is more of an evolutionary or emergent or that sly roundabout way of doing things, right?
What does asymptotically mean?
Well, asymptotically is a mathematical term, and it's like you have a pile of sand. Let's say you have 21 million grains, right? And every 4 years you take a half of that sand away, and then 4 years later you come and take another half away. That's asymptotic, and so so that number is approaching zero, but it never gets there. And what's really interesting is in the white paper, Satoshi Nakamoto snips that asymptotic tail off, cuts it off, and that will happen about 140 years from now.
So is this the halving? Is this what the halving is every year with the block rewards? Or
Uh,
some,
every 4 years, we do a halving, and that asymptotically moves us closer to zero.
got it. Okay, so
So,
that's what that means. Okay, cool, cool, cool.
yeah, and so we're approaching zero, which means we're going to approach zero inflation, and it becomes increasingly better quality money than our fiat system. So that's what asymptotically or asymptotic means, and
Okay,
and that's something he talked about, but his publication in 2002 was about ideal money, more of a central planning, maintain the index. But in his personal writings, he found politics and even religion as being ineffectual. And so he really turned to technology, to programming. This was his secret world.
it's beautiful. Let's talk about the Nash Nakamoto signature attributes. You're talking about 18 of these. So, we don't have to go through each one of them, but what does this mean exactly for people listening?
Well, John Nash was the lone genius, beautiful mind, and then Satoshi Nakamoto was the programmer, the creator, the principal inventor of Bitcoin. And
Mhm.
the hypothesis of this book is John Nash did he have influence for creating Bitcoin? And then the second thesis, subthesis, is are they the same person? And it
Mm.
doesn't really matter if they're the same or not.
Mhm.
That's not really the value add of this book. What's the true value of this book is when you read through that and you see the connections, you get an easy narrative of what Bitcoin is, why Bitcoin. And normally you'd have to study, say, 100 hours to get there. It took me a lot longer than that to really understand it.
Mhm.
But in this book, if you study Nash and Nakamoto, I think within 2 hours, anybody will be able to really talk about the value statements for Bitcoin and clearly identify when you're deviating from those, from the standard measurement of value, for example.
Okay, let's talk about
When I'm
that
talking,
down here. I wanted to go into what that is.
oh, well, if we go into, I got to find it.
Like the Bitcoin equilibrium is a standard measurement of value. What does that mean exactly?
Oh, well, let's go back to the Nash equilibrium. Let's go
Okay,
back
cool.
even
Okay,
further.
let's do it.
Adam
Back.
wrote, no, Adam Smith
Adam Smith.
wrote. He was one of the
Mhm.
first recognized economists. Published a book in 1776. He was Scottish, not American, and it was called The Wealth of Nations. It's longer than that, but I can't remember the entire title. The Wealth of Nations, and he talked about the law of supply and demand. And what the relationship between those two is something he called the invisible hand. Now, John Nash came along and built a theory that more or less mathematically defined that invisible hand, the Nash equilibrium. And he wrote that during when he was 21 years old
Hmm.
at Princeton, and he got his PhD when he was 21 years old. This guy was a genius. And that
Wow.
Nash equilibrium is really about uh, doing trade with another person. You take numbers and you attribute value and you make an exchange. And doing that mathematically it became very valuable for doing auctions and being able to predict prices. And in war games, Rand used it for, fighter jets coming at each other and knowing when you needed a fire missile before turning away. And so game theory was something that John Nash won a Nobel Prize in. And mathematically, he replaced what Adam Smith defined as the invisible hand in the law of supply and demand. And this is the reason why he won a Nobel Prize in economics. But the Nash equilibrium, it wasn't until his recovery that he started talking about, and only with friends, by the way, he wanted to make the Nash equilibrium immortal. And so I
Whoa.
add the language of calling it the Bitcoin equilibrium because it's emergent. We're going to return to a commodity-based monetary system eventually. And so that's a phrase that I came up with that parallels the Nash equilibrium.
Wow. This is so fascinating. It's like a puzzle, right? All of this is just this really interesting puzzle of of life and how things fit together. And again, I don't feel like a lot of us know, and I may have said this before we hit record, but just about why this money system that we currently have is so toxic. And this fiat system, I call it like poisonous soil. Um, and we all have to eat. We all have to have some food that's grown from the soil and having water and nature. And it's like we all have to have some form of money to exchange because we don't live in villages with 10 people where I can give you the chickens and you give me the apples and then I give this guy the corn and all. And so in order for us to flourish as humans, we need to understand that like a sound, hard money is so important, and I wonder, how do we continue to move in this direction? Is it something, do you like, I want to talk about CBDCs and surveillance, and
Yeah,
obviously we talk about
yeah,
privacy. And I feel like, there's a lot of attitudes out there for folks who are like, oh, Bitcoin's going to win no matter what. We're going to be fine, la, la, la. And I'm like, I'm not confident of anything just because of the way life can throw all these surprises at us. Like none of us expected this ridiculous pandemic that happened a few years back, And so, for those of you listening, a CBDC is a central bank digital currency, and it's basically surveillance money and it's behavior control money. And it's something that I think they're going to have another pandemic, and I think they're going to issue these, and I think it's going to be the excuse to get off the dollar in its current form and get into a cashless society, which would be the worst thing ever.
yeah.
And people who don't understand, like we are, I think we're on a race. I mean, do you feel energetically like we need to hustle and get this the sky is falling, like we need Bitcoin?
Yeah, and also to answer your previous question about, I finally found it, departures from standard measurement of value. What I covered there, and it answers both questions. First of all, I addressed fake Atoshi,
Oh
Craig
God.
Wright.
Yeah.
I put in the legal thing that he had to post on his. I mean, the guy lied,
Oh my
and
God. Yeah.
he was convicted, and so yeah. Why would somebody lie about me, Satoshi Nakamoto? But there's also other departures from the standard measurement of value because he
Hmm.
didn't understand what Bitcoin was. Clearly, his narrative is like, what are you talking about? If you compare Craig Wright to John Nash, I mean, it's two different things.
Yeah.
And likewise, if you look at Vitalik's work, it's the same. What did I write? Departure from standard measurement of value. So, I mean, again, you could equate Ethereum to a CBDC because it is a departure from standard measurement of value. It's
Hmm.
not Bitcoin's narrative. So I think that clearly defines it as and let me just add one more concept here. It's not just a standard measurement of value that's really the key narrative here. It's the equilibrium. That equilibrium where you have a relationship between the buyer and the seller. It's mathematical. It's just money. It's just a transaction,
It's
right?
just a transaction. Yeah. And
Yeah,
and oh, sorry, keep going.
but that standard measurement of value is related to that equilibrium. So it's the same narrative.
And let's talk about, like, I want to come back to privacy and the CBDCs and obviously starting to think about the KYC and AML stuff with, you know, um, what they're trying to implement for Bitcoin users around the world. Like, CBDCs, for folks who, again, who are listening who don't know what they are. Um, Imagine, you have whatever X units of your CBDCs in your account, and, somebody wants to decide that, oh, climate change is a thing, and you can only have, one hamburger a week, or maybe you made the meme post from Governor Newsom, or any of
Yeah,
these things that if these powers that be don't like the way that you're behaving, or if you're associating with Craig Wright or whoever, in
yeah,
social circles, what they do over in China, it's like, oh, you can't ride the bus today, or you can't go buy milk, or you can't, do different things. Like, they can start limiting your ability to go be out there in the world unless you change your behavior according to their whims. And so
yeah.
I feel like that's going to start getting, people will, they'll market it as this really great thing,
No,
like we got our
it's
stimmy
not
checks.
good.
Yeah.
I,
And
I want
so,
privacy. I want a transaction of my value between two people. I don't want a threesome. I don't want to do a threesome with Jerome Powell.
no.
That's a CBDC. I don't
But
want that.
But some would argue, right now we're already in that realm if we're using fiat, right? Because everybody, if I use a credit card, everybody knows what I've purchased, and they can go get access to all of that information. They can't necessarily go control it and say you can only use your credit card today here. And so this is more from a current, a currency unit accounting uh, perspective. But I feel like, you know, people need to start being proactive and understanding, like, if you value your freedom, if you value your ability to speak freely, and if you value your ability to make your own choice of what type of medicine you would like to have, or food you would like to have, or where you would like to go and not be stuck in a 15-minute city, um, having currency that you can use, having Bitcoin that they can't censor and say, nope, you can't go spend it here, is extremely, extremely important. I just feel like I'm, we're on a race, Bryan. Like,
We are, and it's all about CBDCs, fiat. It's a system of control. Didn't
mhm,
start out that way in 1971. It says, oh, we just need to expand the monetary system a little bit. But now it is expanded really big now, and they want to expand it a lot bigger in the future because they know another crisis is going to happen.
yeah,
So it's turned into a system of control, and it's the ultimate system of control, especially the CBDC. Nothing can compete with that. Nothing.
yeah.
So it's the biggest, gangster on the block. We we do not want to go down that path, even though we already have gone down that path with fiat.
Yeah, and you think about, programmable money, and, oh, it's gonna expire, like, you have to go spend it at a certain period, by Friday, or you don't have your money anymore, and that's something that is, again, it's like, how can you save for your future if you're being forced to save in this currency that now you have to go spend, and you don't actually get to save and accumulate, wealth for your, like a squirrel. Cool. I want to get my little nuts for the winter. If those nuts expire and they're more like a piece of white bread, you're not going to get through the winter, and
Yeah,
so I feel like people need to understand why it's important to have a money that will hold its value over time. And CBDCs, will get manipulated depending on how, the button pushers want to manipulate us. Um,
yeah. Again, we got to get back to a standard measurement of value. That's the
mhm.
fundamental thing going on. And this goes back all the way to 1950. This is John Nash observed this. He rolled in there with von Neumann. This von Neumann guy was a big time game theory guy. He built the lens for or designed the lens for atomic weapons. Von Neumann was well known. Okay, and here
Okay.
comes young John Nash rolls in there and he says, "Nope, we don't need all these complicated contracts. We just need an equilibrium." And uh, and Neumann says, "What? That's too simple." And
Mhm.
uh, and he says, "I disagree with you." Wrote his papers and won a Nobel Prize for it. So again, we're having the same conversation that goes all the way back to 1950 right now, and it's just over and over again. Oh, we got to make it more complicated. No, we don't. Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Kiss principle, right?
Absolutely.
Oh my
And
gosh.
and that brings up a cool concept. Occam's razor. Have you ever heard of Occam's razor?
I have. Good. Why don't you repeat it? Because it's
I always
something.
butcher it, but I love it so much.
Okay, cool.
Occam's razor is here's the butchery. It's just basically the simplest idea wins.
Yeah.
And so when you're writing your narratives for whatever business reason you're doing or for engineering, try to make it as simple as possible. And I think that's something that John Nash was really, and any good scientist is pursuing. How do you make this theory as simple as possible without losing, its functionality? And there's some people out there that we all know, we all have friends that just make everything complicated and they think they're so smart because they make things complicated. And you're listening to them and they're going, any topic, they just go off for like 5 minutes. And it's like, okay, come back in, to the conversation. Keeping things simple. Occam's razor is really about the simplest idea wins. I know that's not always the case, but I think it's
Yeah,
often the case. And
I think
Bitcoin is Occam's razor.
it is. It's the simplest solution, and I think it's, it does speak to the human spirit sometimes, and certainly to the human ego. So there's, a double edged, conversation there when people get excited and they get complex. And I know my brain likes to go do that again. I'm not an aerospace engineer, but I do think in terms of like big long-term visions and how does this go here and how's a holistic thing and how does this connect here and how does this go here if you push the button. It's uh the Rube Goldberg machine kind of thing. And so to me it's fun and creative to think that way, so I'm not doing it from from an ego standpoint. But then there's obviously some folks like who do that from the like, look at me, I can go spout off all this stuff and you don't know what I'm talking about. And so I think there's a fine dance between that, to allow for that creative play, and then also to understand like, okay, bring it back, give me the nugget of how this is going to be
Yeah,
an actionable thing that's going to make a difference for the world. And
yeah.
and so that's kind of the fun, synthesizing something complex into something simple and actionable, not just a concept, right? um,
Yeah, making it simple is the hard part. Once it's simple, hey, we can have fun now.
Oh my gosh. And so, all right, so let's do you have any final things? Do you want to talk about Apex Environmental Solution, just your other book, really quick? Because
Um,
obviously we were talking originally about conservation efforts. And I think this is, I told you I was listening to this book as I was shoveling snow several months back. And, I noticed you were, obviously you're quoting Jeff Booth a lot, who's one of my heroes, of course.
oh
And
yeah,
yeah, Jeff, where is Jeff?
yeah. I
He's
call it
somewhere.
booth
Oh, he's right above my
deflation.
head. There he is, right next to Prince and my belly cast with my baby.
Yeah, yeah, Jeff Booth and Greg Foss, they're my two favorite Bitcoiners by
Oh,
far. I love
yeah,
those guys.
it's love.
But yeah, I think Apex Environmental Solution, it's like 400-page book. Uh, I why don't we do this? Why don't we go to the prize in Nash Equilibrium, or Bitcoin in Nash Equilibrium?
Okay, hold
The
on.
prize is at the very end, and I just wrote six of them in the table of contents.
Yep, right here.
And Bitcoin eliminates insidious inflation. Velocity of value accelerates. International peace dividend. Cost of living decreases, obviously. Debt jubilee. That's a little more difficult concept,
Hmm.
but it's very valid. Now, this is something that John Nash wrote. Political corruption diminishes.
Mm,
I love that. And so those six benefits that will come out of the emerging Bitcoin equilibrium. This is going to take time,
hmm.
asymptotically, right? It's asymptotic. We're only taking away half of the sand pile at a time, and we're only doing that every 4 years. So we're going to get there. So if you know where we're going to end up in the long run, where are you going to store your wealth? I mean, clearly, don't trust fiat. That's the main thing.
Definitely don't trust fiat. And so for all the environmentalists out there, who may be listening to us, um, what would you say to them other than go get some Bitcoin? Like, should they start thinking in terms of um, putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, starting to fund their projects overseas in different areas with Bitcoin, so that maybe they can pay some indigenous folks, as long as there's a circular economy to some level where they can transact in Bitcoin and not just be stuck with, quote unquote airline points that aren't transactable for them? How can folks in the environmental movement start to take action today?
Well, I think to understand why Bitcoin is the apex environmental solution, there's lots of ways to look at that. We've already discussed how any conservation effort in the fiat system is futile.
Mm-hmm.
Another way to look at it is from a Hayek perspective, who is an economist. By the way, John Nash said that his views were similar to Hayek, right? This is one of
Okay.
the connections. And clearly, Bitcoin is that sly roundabout way. The
Mm-hmm.
implementation of Bitcoin is something that Hayek prophesied about. And so the point is, if we can have efficient growth instead of everything second rate growth, that is conservation. And so the point is if we take that Frederick Hayek approach where we are not relying on expanding the monetary system and forcing artificial growth, then we can have conservation efforts that are no longer futile, that we can build truly generational wealth at that point, instead of it just being wiped out by this artificially low interest rates, artificial growth, and second rate everything.
So, do you have a couple more minutes? Because that just brought up a couple questions for me. Is this
Yeah.
okay? Great. Thank you so much. So, okay, let's think about our consumption models, right? And we think about our consumption consciousness. And I think about right now, and I've talked about this a lot. Obviously as Bitcoiners, we have low time preference. We think in terms of, okay, the more that we understand now, wow, okay, do I need to go buy that chocolate bar, or do I need this extra plastic widget or whatever? So I think for a lot of us Bitcoiners, our consumption models and our consumption mindset and consciousness has shifted greatly. I know it has for me, for sure, because I'm like, okay, I can go get a manicure and that's going to cost me $60, or I can not do that and I can paint my nails for free, or for $4 for my nail polish, and then I can put $56 into Bitcoin. And so my mind is constantly thinking in terms of that way now, because I'm like, that $56 manicure in 5 years is going to be worth $1,000. And, so that's how I'm thinking, with consumption. And so I think about, with conservation, and savings of money, and obviously conservation of the earth. Um, I wonder, again, like, we've obviously got our first world nations and countries that we've got electricity. We're good to go. We're fine for the most part. We can have medicine. We can have transportation. We've got all these developing places who don't have access to that, right? And so it's not about, oh, let's just go make a bunch of throwaway stuff for them, but we need to get them at least up to, you have electricity, and you have running water, and you can refrigerate your medicine. How do you think, is there an opportunity for us to continue, like, getting out of the overconsumption throwaway mindset that we have
Yeah.
as first world citizens? Because everything's like, oh, don't worry, just I'll get a new one, throw it away, it's fine, it's only $3, and like our younger generation has that mindset. They don't value, like the quality of the products and goods and services. They're just more into, like, cool, it's cheap, I can go to the dollar store, or I can get this cheap thing. And so how can we address um, our consumption mindset and consciousness so that we can support, other people getting at least up to some level of health and prosperity in these developing countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally what we're asking is how do we exit hyperconsumption
Hmm.
and the fiat world? Debt-based assets increase GDP and increases consumption, and we're becoming financialized. Everything's too big to fail now. It's being centralized. That kind of dependency to pay off that debt that requires more consumption. So that's why we're trapped in this hyperconsumption world. And really, the only exit is really is a monetary system that is not debt based and returning back to a commodity based monetary system. So how do we exit? That's why Bitcoin is the apex environmental solution. Is we can exit hyperconsumption. We don't have to borrow a lot of money and go into debt so that we can take advantage of this artificially low interest rate. We can things will be at their utility price, and they won't be distorted. And like Hayek said, we won't be doing this malinvestment, this artificial growth. So yeah, it's all interrelated for escaping hyperconsumption and really returning to the simple life rather than being dependent on a third party to tell us how to live our lives and giving us free whatever to incentivize us to spend our time, our value.
Yeah, and I agree. I feel like it's going to take some time to get out of that because when you see things in your mind, as a human being, and it's like, wow, I can have this. It's easy. It's free money or it's cheap money. Buy now, pay later kind of thing. Um, my family grew up, not with a lot of money, but two people in my family had to file bankruptcy, and of course, just destroyed their lives. But they had the mindset of like credit card, credit card, credit card, credit card, credit card, later, 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 and so they didn't have the consciousness around, you know, live within your means, and
Yeah.
whatnot. And so I do think that there's something to be said about financial literacy and education for our young people. And I know you're a big STEM advocate. Um, the thing with STEM and STEAM is there's no financial literacy in those programs, and like we're not
Yeah.
talking about how are we, I mean, that's fundamental inside of any educational, uh, uh, world. And so I feel like how can we make sure that we're educating the young folks, as much as possible on these things. And so what are you seeing out there with that for young
Well,
people? And then we'll wrap up. I don't want to take up too much time.
listening to you, I'm thinking, okay, we're only showing one side of the coin. If
Mhm.
you look on the other side of the coin, they're the creditors, they're the SIBs, they're the banks. They're all this debt that's growing. It's their asset. It's it's good for. I mean, I was just listening to an economist talking about how, they're growing their balance sheet. But that's our debt. And so when we say, hey, we're $35 trillion in debt, that's a bad thing. That's one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, the grifters are making trillions of dollars off of this, to the tune of $1 trillion per year for our debt. And if you look
Mhm.
at the world debt, perhaps that's 300 trillion, 900 trillion, depending on how you look at it.
Mhm.
And it's accelerating. So what we're trying to do is reduce that. And the significantly important banks, they have an immune system and they're going to do everything they can to stop us from getting out of debt. That's the big picture. So, what can we do? Well, one thing is we can exit, but at the same time, we need to somehow stop these powers from expanding that debt. Uh, you know, that brings up another topic. When I was running for U.S. Senate, I had a
Mhm.
Bitcoiner ask me a question, and this was a question that kind of I didn't know how to answer. He said, "Well, knowing what Bitcoin is and knowing what the fiat system, would you be a fiscal conservative, or would you just go out there and spend it and use the fiat for what it is and play the fiat game because we live in a fiat world, right?" And I'm thinking, as a fiscal conservative, well, I would be a kind of a one, I'd stay hyper focused on Bitcoin as a senator. There's nothing more important than fixing our monetary system. But I think now that I've been away from that, I think as if I was a U.S. senator, I think you have to play the fiat game. You you have to spend. It's in our
Mhm.
interest. And
Yeah.
so yeah, just go ahead and spend fiat like crazy and try to not do malinvestment, but do good investment instead of the crazy stuff that a lot of politicians do. But at the same time, both of these monetary systems are going to coexist, and the one will continue to grow asymptotically, or it will be emergent. And so I think we just need to be a little bit patient with all the crazy fiat and know that the deficit spending is going to continue. That's our fiat reality.
Do you ever think that like they're going to get Bitcoin as a reserve, like they had gold, and then all of a sudden we have a
I do.
6102 thing that happens?
Yeah, I think as it becomes common understanding of what Bitcoin is, what is the narrative of Bitcoin, the true narrative, not people that are really talking about tokens or blockchain, but actually talking about standard measurements of value and long-term contracts that are stable and these are the main value. Yeah, they're going to clearly go, okay, we need that. We need that kind of investment instead of malinvestment. We need real market rates, not artificial everything. So I think as people come to understand that, yeah, I think we're going to go to a strategic reserve for the United States. Other countries will do it first, of course, but the United States will catch on as it becomes common sense.
Do you think, like, again, and I'm not an economist, and I'm still, obviously, I do this podcast so I can learn and obviously share people's stories and wisdom like yourself. So, so if we have a strategic reserve, or if we have now, if we start issuing, let's say, any type of currency on top of Bitcoin from governments, if governments start doing the same game that they did with, um, issuing gold, and so each government, let's say, has their own reserve, and they're like, cool, this is the Russia Bitcoin token, this is the US Bitcoin token, la la la. Do you think that, circling back to Larry Fink and Trump earlier, like, I'm concerned about the governments all of a sudden being like, it's in our, military interest that we have all of this, Bitcoin, and so we're going to come find you if you have Bitcoin, like with, like, again, that 6102. Are you worried that it's all of a
No,
sudden just going to turn into this thing where all the governments just gobble it up, and then they utilize it to be stronger than each other, and obviously you can verify who's got what?
I'm not
Am
worried
I
about
crazy?
that because
Is that a silly idea, or am I paranoid?
no, it's good to think that way. It is only the paranoid survive, right? But
I don't
it's
know.
true. The censorship resistance is going to protect us. So I think that because of the technology, I'm not worried. It's safer than gold. But I want to get back to this idea of a strategic reserve. It's
Okay.
so easy and common sense. I know people go, "Oh, we're not going to do that." Yeah, we will, because it's so easy to print money and just buy it. And
Right.
if you
Yeah.
want to compare, if you want to compare MMT to Keynesianism, you know, modern monetary theory, which is
Mhm.
you should print money to do these government things. I want to make the statement that there's no difference between Keynesianism and MMT, no difference at all, because both of them are expanding the monetary system. One is
Mhm.
just doing a little bit, and the other one is doing it a lot. It's the same thing. Bitcoin fixes that. Debasement, expanding the monetary system causes inflation. That's that's where inflation comes from. That's the principal cause of inflation. There are other causes, but nothing is more principal than expanding the monetary system, the debasement of the currency. And so, if MMT and Keynesianism are the same, if it's easy to just print, why wouldn't we, when we realize that all of a sudden 21 million is a scarce asset, why wouldn't we just start printing and buying it? It's in our interest and it's common sense. So, yeah, United States eventually, other countries will do it, but eventually the United States will do it too.
And but do you worry about any, let's talk about BRICS really quick. I know I keep asking all these questions, but like with what's going on with BRICS, do you feel like that's going to be any kind of an issue, that we're going to be competing with these other, this groups of countries that are trying to issue currencies?
Well, I'm not an expert in that area, but this is just my opinion. The Saudis, I think back in July, they said that they were, you know, they were, let's say, they would consider it a petro yuan.
Mm.
So, do I believe that? I don't. Not at this moment. No, no, no. They have too many capital controls in China for the yuan to become a global reserve currency. I just I don't believe it. But I'm not an expert in this area. I think that they'll be selling oil in Bitcoin before they sell it in yuan. That's just my opinion.
Ooh, that'll be interesting one. Oh my gosh. All right. So where everybody can obviously find you at solstin.com, Solstin, for those of you listening and not watching. Um, and then following you over on X. Is X the best way to like follow your work, and like
Yeah,
where do
you
you
can
like to
follow
post?
me. I'm trying to learn Nostr right now and trying to get involved in that. But yeah, you can follow and go to Silson.com, and there's a tab John Nash, and that's where you can find more information about Nash. And there's Apex Environmental Solution is the homepage. So yeah. Oh, and
Amazing.
also I got Zenimal. I put that out
Yeah,
free.
yeah.
You can just follow the audio link and listen to that if you want to.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So three amazing books. I've got two of three. I've got to get through that the whole the book, the Bitcoin and Nash Equilibrium. I wasn't able to read the whole thing. So but I'm excited. I want to just keep learning, and being a little curious student. And I'm so appreciative of people like you who are taking all these concepts and getting them organized for those of us so we can learn a little bit more and get interested in history, get interested in math, get interested in peace, and how Bitcoin can hopefully create a more peaceful world for everybody. Um, yeah. Any final thoughts that you want to share with
Yeah,
the
man, I
audience?
just want to say I love your vibe. I love your frequency. I want to get up to that level. I do.
Thanks. Well, I mean, I don't know. And you were saying this, on the Progressive Bitcoiners podcast about, Bitcoin being hope, right? And I think a lot of us Bitcoiners talk about Bitcoin as hope. And I'll
Yeah,
take it a step further. I always say Bitcoin is hope in action. It's not just this little philosophical, oh, la, 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 let's go meditate and turn on and tune out or whatever, turn out, whatever the old, thing that Tim Leary used to say. Um, but it's just like Bitcoin is this thing that it's even though it's digital, it's real and it's impacting all of us. It's like this that is a frequency, it is a vibration that's getting in a lot of us. And I know I talk to a lot of folks, like I can't imagine how dire my mindset would be if I didn't know about Bitcoin with looking at what's going on in this world today. And so I just feel like Bitcoin does help me raise my vibration as a woman and as an entrepreneur and as a change maker and somebody who cares about leaving the world better for my children and everyone's children. And so I'm just so grateful for whoever, however many, minds, beautiful minds got together to create Bitcoin for the rest of us so that we can have these higher vibrations and we can have these opportunities. Like you and I never would have gotten to meet if it weren't for Bitcoin, right? Like how cool is
yeah,
that?
yeah,
I mean,
totally.
it keeps bringing people from all walks of life together and we're like cross-pollinating our ideas. And it's like it's magic to me. It's like a giant, beautiful magic trick. And I love it.
Yeah, Bitcoin is hope. It gives me more hope than anything out there. It's like I said, fixing the monetary system is the most important thing we can do. And
Yeah.
we can't fix it in a revolution, I don't think, but I think we can fix it with an evolution,
Yeah.
and that takes a little bit of time and patience. And I think the Bitcoiners are very patient to make this happen.
Yeah, our low time preference it's been a great shift for sure in my consciousness as a woman. So I'm grateful. So thank you so much, Bryan. And thanks for everything you're doing out there in the future. And you guys, everyone listening, like make sure you guys go get all three of his books, go follow Bryan and, share this podcast with other people. If there's environmentalists, if there's young people, whoever you think would benefit from this podcast, make sure that you guys share this. And then, and I'm going to just do a quick plug, Bryan. We're having a podcast, a Bitcoin for Podcasters virtual summit on September 28th. And so I'm going to be hosting a lot of different virtual summits, whether it's Bitcoin for environmentalists, Bitcoin for coaches, Bitcoin for families. And so we're going to have Adam Curry. Remember Adam Curry, who was from MTV? So he's going to, he was a VJ on MTV. He's the podfather. He's got No Agenda podcast. And then we've got a bunch of other great guys who are going to be there from Get Albie, from Fountain, from Ellen Bits, and from Podhome. And so these five gentlemen are taking time to, talk about Bitcoin and help podcasters understand how to use Lightning, how we're going to use splits, how we can, have censorship-free podcasts, hopefully with our money. And so I'm really excited about that. And yeah, so it's
Mhm.
going to be super cool. So
That'd
tune
be
in and
great.
check it out.
Will do.
All right, Bryan, and everybody listening, thanks you guys so much. And wishing you so much love today. I know things are a little crazy out there, but remember to breathe, and we're going to get through this together.
Yeah. Thank you,
Right.
Valerie.
All right. Thanks.